My wife came home crying, saying, "The company is bankrupt. We're losing our house." She was shaking, tears streaming down her face, begging me to find a solution before we ended up on the streets. While I was calling my parents that night to borrow money, she was at a luxury restaurant with her friends laughing about how easily I fooled my husband. When I heard that voice recording, my revenge had just begun. My name is David Richardson, 42 years old, Senior Marketing Director at a consulting firm in Denver, Colorado. For 15 years, I built my career from the ground up, working 60-hour weeks to provide for my family. My wife Sarah and I met in college, married 8 years ago, and bought our dream home in the suburbs. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, running her own small business from our home office. Life was good, stable, predictable. That changed on a rainy Tuesday evening in March when Sarah burst through the front door, sobbing uncontrollably. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she collapsed onto the living room sofa, her whole body shaking. I'd never seen her like this before. Sarah was always the composed one, the problem solver, the person who kept our household running smoothly while I travelled for work. "David, we need to talk," she said between sobs, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something terrible has happened with my business." I sat down beside her, placing my hand on her shoulder, trying to offer comfort while my mind raced with possibilities. Had she lost a major client? Was there some kind of legal issue? "The design agency I've been working with for 3 years just went under," she continued, wiping tears from her eyes with the back of her hand. "They owed me $80,000 for completed projects. My lawyer says they filed for bankruptcy protection yesterday. I'm never going to see that money, David. Never." My stomach dropped. $80,000 was significant money for us, representing nearly 6 months of her annual income. But what came next was even worse. "That's not all," Sarah said, her voice becoming smaller. "I've been using our joint savings to cover business expenses, thinking I'd get paid and put it back before you noticed. But now—" She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "David, I've spent our entire emergency fund, $65,000. It's gone." I felt the world tilt beneath me. Our emergency fund represented years of careful saving, our safety net, our security blanket. Without it, we were one unexpected expense away from serious financial trouble. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "6 months," she whispered. "Maybe 7. I kept thinking the agency would pay me, that I could fix this before you found out. I never meant for it to get this bad." I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at our neighbour's perfectly manicured lawn, trying to process what I'd just heard. Sarah's business had always been her pride and joy. She'd built it slowly, carefully, turning her artistic talents into a steady income stream. The idea that it could threaten our financial stability had never occurred to me. "We'll figure this out," I finally said, turning back to face her. "We always do. Maybe I can pick up some freelance projects, work some weekends. We'll tighten our budget, cut unnecessary expenses." Sarah nodded gratefully, but I could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. That night, as she slept fitfully beside me, I lay awake calculating our options, trying to determine how we could recover from this financial setback without destroying everything we'd built together. The next morning brought even worse news. Sarah woke me up at 6 in the morning, her phone clutched in her trembling hand, tears already flowing down her cheeks. She'd received an email from her accountant with the subject line, "Urgent, tax implications of business loss." "David, There's more, she said, her voice barely audible. Because I used personal funds for business expenses without proper documentation, the Internal Revenue Service is going to consider it personal income. We owe $45,000 in taxes by April 15th. That's 3 weeks from now. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, my mind reeling. $45,000 in taxes on top of our already depleted savings meant we were looking at financial ruin. Our monthly mortgage payment was $3,800. Our car payments, insurance, utilities, and basic living expenses added up to another $4,000. Without Sarah's income and with this massive tax bill looming, we were facing bankruptcy ourselves. "We need to call the bank," I said, getting dressed quickly. "Maybe we can refinance the house, pull out some equity to cover the tax bill." But the bank had bad news too. Our loan officer, Janet Morrison, reviewed our application with sympathetic eyes, but ultimately shook her head. "With Sarah's business income effectively eliminated and this tax liability on your record, you don't qualify for a cash-out refinance. I'm sorry, David. Your debt-to-income ratio is just too high now." Over the following weeks, our situation deteriorated rapidly. Sarah applied for jobs, but graphic design positions were scarce, and the few interviews she managed to secure didn't result in offers. I started working evenings and weekends, taking on consulting projects for my former colleagues, but the extra income wasn't enough to make a significant dent in our financial hole. We began cutting expenses aggressively. We cancelled our cable subscription, stopped eating out, and postponed all non-essential purchases. Sarah sold her professional camera, equipment, and design software licenses, raising about $12,000, but it felt like emptying a swimming pool with a teaspoon. The stress was affecting every aspect of our lives. Sarah barely slept, spending hours online searching for job opportunities or researching debt consolidation options. I found myself snapping at colleagues during meetings, my patience worn thin by constant worry about our financial future. One evening in early April, Sarah approached me with a proposal that made my stomach churn. "David, I've been thinking. Maybe we should ask your parents for help. I know it's not ideal, but they have the means, and this is an emergency." My parents, Robert and Helen Richardson, had built a successful accounting firm over 3 decades. They were comfortable financially, but asking them for money felt like admitting complete failure as an adult. Still, with the tax deadline approaching and no other options in sight, I knew Sarah was right. The phone call to my father was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. I explained our situation as clearly as possible, emphasizing that we viewed this as a temporary loan that we'd repay with interest as soon as Sarah found steady employment. "Of course, son," my father said without hesitation. "Family helps family. We'll transfer $50,000 to your account tomorrow morning. Pay us back when you can." That night, for the first time in weeks, Sarah and I both slept peacefully. We had a plan, a lifeline, a way forward. Or so I thought. 3 days after my parents transferred the money, I made a discovery that changed everything. I was using Sarah's laptop to print our tax documents when I accidentally opened her email instead of mine. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was an email thread between Sarah and her business partner, Jessica Martinez, dating back 4 months. The subject line read, "Project Payment Schedule Update." As I scrolled through the messages, a pattern emerged that made me question everything I thought I knew about our situation. "Hey Jess," one of Sarah's emails read, "the Thompson Industries project payment came through today. $45,000 deposited to the business account. Should I transfer your half now, or wait until next week? Jessica's response was equally shocking. Go ahead and transfer it now. By the way, how's the financial crisis story working with David? Still buying it? Sarah's reply made my hands shake. Hook, line, and sinker. He actually called his parents to borrow money yesterday. I almost felt bad watching him squirm, but this is exactly what I needed to see. Is he really husband material if he can't handle a little financial pressure? The girls were right. This is the perfect test. I scrolled back further, finding more emails that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Sarah's business wasn't failing. It was thriving. She'd received payments from multiple clients over the past 6 months, totaling nearly $200,000. The bankruptcy story was completely fabricated. But the worst part was yet to come. I found an email from 2 weeks ago where Sarah described our situation to Jessica in detail. David is working himself to death trying to fix our financial problems. He's taking on extra projects, barely sleeping, and he actually pawned his father's watch yesterday to help with expenses. It's almost sad how hard he's trying to be the hero. Jessica's response chilled me to the bone. So, the test is working. You're really figuring out if he's marriage material this way? Sarah's final email in the thread was dated just yesterday. Absolutely. I needed to know if he'd crack under pressure or step up and take care of his family. The fact that he swallowed his pride and asked his parents for money shows real commitment. I'm actually proud of him. I think I'll end the charade next week and tell him everything. I closed the laptop and sat in stunned silence for several minutes. My wife had been lying to me for months, manipulating me into a state of panic about our finances, watching me suffer while she secretly collected payments from thriving business projects. She'd turned our marriage into some kind of psychological experiment, testing my character like a lab rat in a maze. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I felt physically sick. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a small deception that had spiraled out of control. This was systematic manipulation designed to cause maximum emotional distress, while she evaluated my worthiness as a husband. That evening, Sarah came home with Chinese takeout from our favourite restaurant, something we hadn't been able to afford in weeks, according to our supposed financial crisis. She seemed unusually cheerful, humming while she set the table, completely unaware that I'd discovered her deception. "How was your day?" she asked innocently, as if she hadn't spent the last 4 months psychologically torturing the person she claimed to love. "Fine," I replied, my voice carefully neutral. "Same as always." As we ate dinner, Sarah chatted about her job search, maintaining the fiction that she was desperately seeking employment while secretly running a successful design business. Every word that came out of her mouth was another lie, another layer of manipulation designed to keep me dancing to her tune. That night, as Sarah slept peacefully beside me, I began planning my response. If she wanted to test my character, I was happy to oblige. But this test was going to be on my terms. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead of going to the office, I drove to a private investigator's office in downtown Denver. Marcus Webb had been recommended by a colleague who'd used his services during a messy business dispute. Marcus was a former police detective with 25 years of experience in surveillance and evidence gathering. "I need documentation of my wife's actual business activities," I explained, providing him with the details I discovered in Sarah's emails. Phone records, financial transactions, meeting recordings if possible. Everything that proves she's been lying about our financial situation. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. This kind of marital deception is more common than you might think. Usually it's about hidden debt or secret affairs, but financial manipulation as a relationship test, that's a new one for me. He quoted me a fee that made me wince, but I agreed immediately. The money my parents had lent us would cover his services with plenty left over. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus worked his magic. He obtained copies of Sarah's business banking records, documented her meetings with clients, and even managed to record a conversation she had with Jessica about their Testing David project. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Meanwhile, I played my part perfectly. I continued taking on extra consulting work, maintained our strict budget, and even mentioned looking into selling my car to help with our supposed financial crisis. Sarah responded with sympathetic concern, occasionally offering reassurance that things would get better soon. The psychological aspect of her deception became clearer as I watched her more carefully. She seemed to be genuinely enjoying the power dynamic she'd created. When I came home exhausted from working extra hours, she'd offer to make dinner and suggest we watch a movie to help me relax. When I mentioned stress about our situation, she'd give thoughtful advice about managing financial anxiety. It was as if she'd created an elaborate role-playing scenario where she got to be the supportive wife, helping her husband through a crisis she'd artificially created. The level of psychological manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication and cruelty. On a Thursday evening, exactly 3 weeks after I'd discovered her emails, Sarah announced that she had good news to share over dinner. We went to a modest restaurant, still maintaining the pretense of financial hardship, where she delivered her prepared speech about having some opportunities that might help improve our situation. "I've been networking with some of my old clients," she said, her eyes bright with what I now recognized as the excitement of a successful con artist. "There might be some projects available that could bring in some immediate income. Nothing guaranteed, but it's the most hopeful I've felt in months." I nodded enthusiastically, playing the role of the grateful husband whose prayers were finally being answered. "That's wonderful news, honey. Whatever you can bring in will help tremendously." That night, Sarah initiated intimacy for the first time since her supposed financial crisis began. As she moved against me in the darkness, whispering about how much she loved me and how we'd get through this together, I felt like I was being made love to by a complete stranger. The woman I thought I'd married would never have been capable of this level of calculated deception. The next morning, Marcus called with the final pieces of evidence I needed. "I've got everything documented," he said. "Bank records, recorded conversations, photographic evidence of her business meetings. Your wife has been running a successful design operation while telling you she was financially ruined. The numbers show she's made almost $250,000 in the past 6 months." "Perfect," I replied. "Send me everything. It's time to end this game." That Saturday evening, I prepared for the confrontation that would end our marriage. I'd printed out every piece of evidence Marcus had gathered, organized it chronologically, and prepared a detailed timeline of Sarah's deception. But I wasn't planning to simply expose her lies and demand an explanation. If Sarah wanted to play psychological games, I was going to show her what a real test looked like. I set up a hidden camera in our living room, positioning it to capture the entire conversation. Then I called Sarah's parents, Robert and Martha Collins, and her sister Jennifer, asking them to come over for an important family discussion. I also invited my own parents, telling everyone that Sarah and I had significant news to share about our relationship. When everyone arrived, Sarah looked confused but not alarmed. She probably assumed I was planning to announce some kind of financial recovery, or perhaps discuss our future plans now that our crisis was resolving. "Thank you all for coming," I began, standing in front of our gathered family members. Sarah and I wanted to share some important information about what has been happening in our marriage over the past few months. Sarah smiled expectantly, still unaware of what was coming. As you all know, Sarah told me in March that her business had failed and we were facing financial ruin. She said we'd lost our emergency savings and owed significant taxes. Based on this information, I asked my parents to lend us $50,000 to prevent us from losing our home. I paused, noting the looks of concern and sympathy on our family's faces. They were remembering the stress and worry we'd all shared during those difficult weeks. "What you don't know," I continued, "is that every word of Sarah's story was a lie. Her business never failed. We never lost our emergency savings. We don't owe taxes. Sarah has been running a highly successful design operation for the past 6 months, earning over $250,000 while telling me we were bankrupt." The room fell completely silent. Sarah's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. "But that's not the worst part," I said, pulling out the printed emails. "Sarah didn't lie to me because she was in trouble or afraid or confused. She lied to me as part of what she called a test of my character. She wanted to see how I'd respond to financial pressure, whether I'd step up and take care of my family or crack under the strain." I began reading selections from Sarah's emails to Jessica, watching as the expressions on our family's faces shifted from confusion to shock to disgust. Sarah's mother actually gasped when I read the part about Sarah feeling proud of how hard I was working to solve our fabricated problems. "For 4 months," I continued, "Sarah watched me work myself to exhaustion, swallow my pride to ask my parents for money, and live in constant anxiety about our future. She documented my responses like a scientist studying lab animals, sharing updates with her friends about how well her test was working." Sarah finally found her voice. "David, please let me explain. It wasn't like that. I was confused about our relationship, about whether we were really compatible long term. I needed to know. You needed to know if I loved you enough to sacrifice my health, my pride, and my family relationships to save you from a crisis you invented." I interrupted. "Well, congratulations, Sarah. You got your answer. I do love you that much. Or rather, I love the person I thought you were." I handed each family member copies of the evidence Marcus had gathered. These documents show the timeline of Sarah's deception, including bank records proving her business income and recorded conversations where she discusses her manipulation tactics. Sarah's father stood up abruptly. "Sarah Elizabeth Collins, what the hell is wrong with you?" His voice was shaking with anger. "How could you do this to someone who loves you?" "I was scared," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I was scared we were getting married for the wrong reasons. That David didn't really know who I was. That our relationship couldn't survive real problems." "So you created fake problems and documented his suffering?" my mother asked incredulously. "Sarah, this isn't testing compatibility. This is psychological abuse." The confrontation continued for another hour, with Sarah alternating between tearful apologies and defensive justifications. She insisted that she'd planned to end the charade soon, that she'd learned what she needed to know about my character, that she was proud of how I'd handled the pressure. but the damage was irreversible. Trust, once broken this completely, couldn't be repaired with explanations or apologies. Sarah had shown me exactly who she was capable of being when she thought I couldn't see her true nature. 2 weeks later, I filed for divorce. Sarah kept her successful design business. I kept the $50,000 my parents had lent us, which I used as a down payment on a smaller house across town. The psychological evaluation required for our divorce proceedings confirmed what I already knew. Sarah exhibited narcissistic tendencies and a concerning lack of empathy for the emotional consequences of her actions. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, I ran into Jessica Martinez at a coffee shop downtown. She approached me hesitantly, obviously uncomfortable. "David, I want you to know that I tried to talk Sarah out of what she was doing," she said. "I told her it was cruel and manipulative, but she insisted it was necessary for your relationship." "Thank you for telling me that," I replied. "But I have one question. How many other husbands has Sarah tested this way?" Jessica's expression told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke. "You weren't the first, David. You were the third."